Okay, welcome back, and well done to those of you who knew that that was Rosa Parks, an amazing woman, prominent civil rights activist in the US. So back to calculations. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the practicalities of our advice for you this year to enable you to be fully confident in being able to undertake pharmaceutical calculations. So we're using this textbook. Um, it's not the only textbook that's out there, and clearly calculations are the same whichever book you use. However, for consistency from our point of view, we're going to be using this book and taking you through the different areas of calculations. And we're following a calculation strategy that we have, which, as I said, hopefully will bring you an ability, a confidence in calculations, which will enable you to be totally confident by the end of the year. So the first thing we're going to do is what we call a diagnostic test at the beginning of the year. It's incredibly important that you take this because you need to know areas where you are already strong, but also areas where you need to do more work. And the diagnostic test is designed to give you some ideas of where those strengths and weaknesses are. But from that, that's no good on its own. What we need you to do then is to think to yourself, which areas was I weak in and what do I need to work on? So we practice weaker areas more than we do the stronger areas. However, as we'll see in a minute, it's really important to keep practicing everything as well, but just with more of an emphasis on the areas where you need more help. And this works up to a final calculations exam of 70% pass mark. Now that's, if you think about it, that's not as high as it sounds initially. If you were to make 3 out of 10 errors when you were calculating doses, there would be a lot of patients would be in a lot of trouble. So 70% pass mark, that's the same as the General Pharmaceutical Council in general. Their pass mark is around about the 70% mark. So that's the strategy that we're putting in place, but that will only work if you actually do the work. So what we want you to do is to do that diagnostic test. In the next few weeks, I'm going to be giving you a few lectures around the content of chapters of that book. And basically that's intended to help you understand what the chapter is about. However, I'm not going to be going through many calculations myself because it's you that needs to get the practice, to get the learning, to feel uncomfortable at first, not knowing what you're doing. And it's only by practicing what's in there that you'll actually learn more. And we want you to have your own numeracy plan, to put together a plan that will ensure that you are confident in calculations by the end of the year. Okay, so having said that, chapter 1 is the introduction to the book, and there is some general stuff in there about practicing using calculations in everyday situations. Now it's quite important this because many people say that they can't do calculations. Now the issue is that actually often this means that they don't do any calculations. And the flip side of that is that means they can't do them because they haven't practiced them. Calculations is all about practice. And actually, whilst you're at university, it's okay to make mistakes. It's the way you learn. The only mistake that's a bad mistake to make is to not do the work in the first place, because you will learn nothing from not doing it. You learn an awful lot from getting something wrong. So another thing the book talks about is sense checking. What does that mean? Well, let's say, for example, we were trying to calculate how much of a drug was to be in a tablet of a medication. And if the answer, after calculation, the answer came out with 3 kilograms, hopefully you'd be able to see that might be a bit of a difficult tablet to swallow. So it's all about checking whether the answer makes sense. Remember that we're talking about, when we talk about milligrams to micrograms, that's 1,000 times difference. We talk about micrograms to grams, we're talking about 1,000,000 times difference. So numbers can easily go wrong if you don't make sure that you are always using common units. So we need to make sure the units you're using, the things you are comparing or multiplying or dividing, are the same. Okay, welcome back. We're going to now talk about how you might use what we call the cycle of learning. And that cycle of learning characterized here with these blocks. So if we look at the red block, basically saying, I can't do the calculations, I can't do them, I'm no good at maths. I never have been, I'm rubbish at maths. Now what do you do with that? You either live your life like that and go to the green box where you don't do the calculations, so therefore nothing happens, or you might start to change one or two things in there. So you might try to do calculations. You might not be able to. If you don't do the calculations, you definitely won't be able to. Okay, so sometimes though, when we try to do calculations, we get better at them. In fact, I would suggest that probably any time you actually do the calculations, you get a little bit better at them. And that actually leads into the fact that you can do those calculations. And you know what? That actually makes you feel more like being able to try to do more. And it's this part of the cycle that we want you to get used to, this trying, getting better, being able to do them and keep trying. It's only by doing that that you're actually going to improve and improve your confidence. Okay, some of you may have seen the learning cycle before, and we have unconscious incompetence. What does that mean? That means that you can't do something and you don't even know how bad you are at it. Once you try to do a bit of learning on it, you start to realize you can't do anything about it. You don't know anything about it. That's conscious incompetence. Try a bit harder, learn a bit more, and you actually start to be able to do it. And you're having to think about doing it, but you can do the process. The final stage is unconscious competence, where you just do it without even thinking. Possibly the best example of that is driving. Any of you who are drivers will know that you started off not knowing what to do at all when you sat in the seat and the pedals in front of you couldn't do anything. You started then by being able to do a little bit, but you were aware that you weren't very good. Then you thought you got a bit better and you were aware that you were working hard, but you had to think about everything you were doing. For most people, after they've been driving a while, they don't even remember what they're supposed to be doing. And interestingly, when you try to think about what you're doing, it can often go wrong. So the problem being that you start to get a bit blasé about it. So you don't think about it, it's just unconscious. But the learning cycle is there, it takes us round. It's a fairly neat little way of looking at the learning process. It's another reason to keep practicing. So what do we want you to do in future weeks? We want you to access the book, start to find your way around it. So if you look at the lectures online about the different chapters, I'll give you some idea about what those chapters are about and why they're relevant, what's important about them. Then practice some calculations. Actually have a go. You're not going to learn anything by just looking at what's there. You have to make your brain work. Then what we need you to do is do some practice and calculations. And the next stage is to do more practice. And finally, do even more practice. Actually make it part of your weekly routine to do 3 or 4 calculations. I can promise you that there are a relatively limited number of possible questions that can come up in the exam. The more you practice, the more likely you are to have actually had a go at the questions a number of times before you get to the exam, which means you're much more likely to pass. Okay, on to a brief quiz on what we've just talked about. And your inspiring character for this session. Okay, look forward to seeing you in part 2.